You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today, we'll find out what happens to all the women refugees who risk their lives in those small, rickety boats to get to Europe and survive. We seem to hear about and read about only the men. We'll also talk with an emotion analytics expert and learn from her about how computers are being trained to read feelings. I'm not so sure how I feel about this myself. Last, an indefatigable feminist rock critic brings us up to speed about who she's listening to now and her own new book. But first, we need to look inside the headlines. There was a lot of Supreme Court bashing going on this past week, and I'm sure it will continue from the right wing, blaming the court, of course, for the ruling on marriage equality and on health care, although the court certainly must have appeased them by a pro-death penalty vote after that. And they were blamed for everything short of having been responsible for Confederate battle flags coming down. And a little digression, by the way, about the Confederate battle flag. I know we've covered that before, but I'm getting awfully tired of the defense of it as a way of life, of honor and bravery and ancestors and grace and all. It was a flag of treason, violent treason, in defense of a system of enslaving human beings. Get over it, modern-day secessionists. The South lost the war. You lost. Grow up. Get with the program. Join the country. Robert E. Lee at least had the grace the day after he handed in his sword to apply for citizenship in the United States of America. Follow his example if you want Southern honor. But I digress. Sorry. So the attacks on the court, Senator Cruz, of course, Ted Cruz attacked the court for the rulings and called for a constitutional amendment that would strip the justices of their life tenure by making them subject to retention elections. This is a guy who once clerked for Justice Rehnquist, who was a fierce defender of judicial independence, even if he disagreed with a particular judge or two. Bobby Jindal, another of the clown car candidates for the Republican nomination, said that the court should probably just be disbanded. Later, he tried to walk that back by saying he was in jest, but when he said it, was not smiling. So the attacks on the court have been all over the place and quite consistent for these two decisions in particular. And it always comes down to whether something is constitutional or not. And of course, Scalia and Alito and many members of the court, at this point, the almost majority with a swing vote or two sometimes, but certainly Scalia and Alito and Thomas call themselves strict constructionists and strict constitutionalists in the interpretation of the Constitution. So I, of course, think that they are backwardists, which is my new name for the opposite of a progressive. But I thought it was time to answer these so-called strict constitutionalists with a very articulate politician's words later in life when he was no longer serving in office. His name was Thomas Jefferson. And in a letter to Samuel Kercheval, written on July 12th, 1810, he wrote the following. This, of course, was somebody who helped write the Constitution. He and Madison primarily did that. And signed the Constitution, so probably had a pretty good idea of how to use it, wouldn't you think? These are Jefferson's words in answer to strict constitutionists. Some men look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, too sacred to be touched. They ascribe to the men of the preceding age a wisdom more than human, and suppose what they did to be beyond amendment. I knew that age well. I belonged to it and labored with it. It deserved well of its country. It was very like the present, but without the experience of the present. And 40 years of experience in government is worth a century of book reading. And this, they would say themselves, were they to rise from the dead. I am certainly not an advocate for frequent and untried changes in laws and constitutions. I think moderate imperfections had better be borne with, because when once known, we accommodate ourselves to them and find practical means of correcting their ill effects. But I know also that laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths disclosed, and manners and opinions change with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also and keep pace with the times. We might as well require an adult to wear still the coat which fitted as a child, as a civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors. Thomas Jefferson, July 12, 1810. And now it's time for my first guest. Rana L. Kaliouby, that's spelled Kaliouby, is an emotion analytics expert. What, for example, if a computer could recognize your facial expression and react to how it now knows you feel? Is this a good thing? Is this an alarming thing? Well, Rana L. Kaliouby is the Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Affectiva, an MIT Media Lab spin-off, and she has a mission in her life to bring emotion intelligence to our digital experiences, which makes me a little nervous and quite a bit interested. Here she is. Rana, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Robin. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to learn what is an emotion analytics expert. All I know is that you were at the TED Talks and you were fascinating, and you're working on a computer being able to recognize your facial expression and react to how you feel. This is fascinating. A little scary, a little reassuring, whatever. First of all, just tell us what it is.
Well, I'll start by saying that, I'm passionate about emotions, like I think a lot of us are. Our emotions they play a very important role in our everyday life.
Yep.
They drive, our health and our well-being, everything from our stress levels to how well we sleep, but also, how we learn, how we do business, and how we make decisions. And it could be everything from what cereal you're going to have for breakfast to big decisions like who you're going to marry or, what house you're going to live in. Our emotions also really drive how we interact and we connect with one another. And we see that a lot with, we've done some work with kids on the autism spectrum, and there they struggle to read the emotions of others and express the emotions that they have. And that really affects how they connect and communicate with other people. Mm-hmm. So emotions are important. They matter in our everyday life, but they are missing from our digital communications. And so Affectiva and my work is really all about bringing emotions back into our digital communications.
Okay, and you're the Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Affectiva, and it's an MIT Media Lab spin-off. When it's responsible for, I'm reading some copy written about it. It's responsible for developing emotion sensing algorithms and mining the world's largest emotion data repository. Emotion data repository sounds a little bit Twilight Zone. So tell me what that means.
Sure. I'll start by maybe explaining what we mean by emotion sensing technology.
Yeah, that would be a good place to start.
Right. So as humans, we communicate emotions through a number of channels. It could be in our posture or our voice, or our face. And
Right.
so, at Affectiva, we focus a lot on facial expressions of emotion. And our face provides one of the most powerful ways to communicate our emotional, but also our cognitive state. So everything from enjoyment, surprise, maybe confusion, interest, skepticism. And so we've developed computer algorithms that essentially take any photo or video and is able to identify the facial expression that the person's doing. So say you're smiling and I have a video stream of you smiling. I would give this to our computer algorithms, and the computer would look for patterns on your face. So things like, what does your mouth look like? Are your lip corners, curled up or curled down? Do I see wrinkles around your eyes that are very characteristic of an enjoyment smile? Things like that. So the computer uses machine learning and a ton of data to understand what those different expressions are.
Mm-hmm.
And it does that in real time.
Wow.
And it does that actually without needing to have seen your face before.
Wow.
So, you don't have to be in the database.
So it's looking for those patterns. Your motion analytics platform is used by a third of the Fortune Global 100 companies. Congratulations on the one hand, but on the other hand, they're using it to measure consumer engagement. And this feels a little bit like Big Brotherness, doesn't it? Or how does that? It's the devil is in the details of how it's used, as with any scientific discovery in advance.
Absolutely. So first of all, I'll start by saying every single piece of data that we've collected so far has been with the person's opt-in and consent. So the way this works is, say you're on your laptop and we send you a URL and we say, hey, Robin, would you like to participate in our, test? We're going to, with your permission, we're going to turn the camera on as you watch movie trailer XYZ, right? This new movie trailer.
I see.
And if you say yes, then we proceed to record your video while you watch. And then the computer, most of the time humans don't actually look at those videos. It's just the machine processing them for your facial expressions, for your moment-by-moment response. So the machine can really tell, where were you emotionally engaged? Where were you bored out of your mind, right? Where were you really confused and wasn't getting, the point? And that type of data is what we give to the Fortune 100 companies so that they can optimize their content, so that it's, in the end, consumers want more engaging content. We don't want to be wasting our time. I think we don't want to be wasting our time watching really boring, meaningless.
No,
right?
Certainly we don't. And the fact that it's, as it were, consenting adults helps. It's just there's the fear of, even greater manipulation of the consumer. And this would be a great leap forward in that. You're doing it in a principled way, but once the genie is out of the bottle, others might not. Is there any corrective that you've got built in for that, or is that just what comes with the territory?
So we do several things. So first of all, we're big on opt-in, right? We're very big with privacy, so the data is kept very securely. In a lot of our work, the processing happens on the device, so sometimes we don't even send the face videos anywhere. Like the face videos don't even get recorded. And then we do a lot of what I call evangelizing and educating the public about what this data can and can't tell you. So if you walk into you're buying a car and you walk into a dealership store, right?
Right.
The salesperson that's there is gonna size you up and is gonna look at your emotional states and is gonna respond in real time. So I think as humans we take emotions into consideration and how we interact with each other all the time. And you can call it manipulation, or you can call it persuasion, or you can call it emotion intelligence. But we do that all the time. It's just that it's missing from our digital world, and we want to bring it. Yeah, we want to bring it to our digital experiences. And, I think there's a lot of use cases that are just going to be very analogous to our everyday human interactions. And then there are a lot of, scenarios where it's, pushing the boundaries, I think, and it kind of becomes more Big Brother like, and we stay away from those.
Well, it's comforting to me that a woman, and a young woman scientist, is in charge of it. So big sister or little sister or medium-sized sister is somehow reassuring. It's fascinating work. And I know we can look for it also, that you're working on emotion-enabled digital apps and a lot of other things. So we'll definitely keep an eye on the work that you're doing. And when our computer begins to say, "Why are you feeling sad today, Robin?" I will know who to call. Thank you again. Also, thanks for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
We need to take a brief break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be right back with Lauren Wolfe, who will tell us just why in all those heartbreaking pictures of refugees in leaky wooden boats swarming to Europe to try to survive and not starve, why it seems to be always only men. Don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My next guest is Lauren Wolfe, who is a returnee to this program and is the director of the Women Under Siege project of the Women's Media Center. Lauren is an award-winning journalist who has written for publications all the way from The Atlantic to the New York Times. She also is a columnist at Foreign Policy magazine. Previously, she was a senior editor of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and she's the recipient of the 2012 Frank Oakbird Award for Media and Trauma Study, plus 4 Society of Professional Journalists awards. And in her capacity, both as a journalist and as director of Women Under Siege project, she recently went to Italy to investigate the refugee situation and women firsthand. Lauren, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much.
Now, I know that you've been, in your own capacity as a journalist and also as the director of the Women Under Siege project for Women's Media Center, I know you've been in Italy recently looking into the plight of refugees from the Middle East and elsewhere that are streaming into Europe, in particular the impact on women. So tell us about it.
Sure. I mean, I don't think in this country we're hearing about this crisis nearly as much as we should be. You know, I think it was about 200,000 refugees came to Europe through boat landings, these incredibly dangerous boat landings last year alone. And this year we're already hitting record numbers of people coming, but also of people dying in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And I've noticed we haven't been not only hearing stories of women, but, you know, in all the photos you see men packed into these little boats. I just kept wondering, where are the women? So
yes.
That's why I went over. The reality is there are fewer women coming over than men, but I did meet women who had come on their own. You know, I met unaccompanied minders, you know, girls of 14 years old who come from Somalia and elsewhere, who came on their own, and they're suffering in unique ways from the way men and boys are suffering. There's a very different system in place for them. And what I discovered is, you know, they're really, in some ways, hidden away by the detention system, by the bureaucracy in Italy, and that's part of the reason we're really not hearing their stories.
Aha. You know, the last time that I remember a huge refugee influx into Italy in particular was with the dissolution of Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. And there were a lot of people from Bosnia, from Croatia, who were pouring in. And one of the first things that happened, because I remember that the feminists in Bari, Italy, and in the South in general were trying to deal with this, was that the men, because they couldn't find work, decided they would prostitute the women. And
that's happening again.
It is. Oh, my God.
Well, what's happening is interesting. It's uniquely, I think, affecting Nigerian women who have long been caught up in human trafficking to Europe.
Yeah.
But I was told stories of women who are fleeing Boko Haram, and what's happening is in order to pay the smugglers back, the smugglers are demanding that they go into prostitution, and the women are now sort of, convincing themselves that this is the only route out of the money that they owe. And they're also being told that their families are being held hostage back home, and that they need to pay even more money.
Oh my God.
I think that the Nigerian situation is really shifting for these women and getting very caught up in the refugee crisis.
So you mean that there's a woman, a young woman, a girl really, who has managed to be either freed by or escaped from Boko Haram and probably is not accepted back in her village because she's been shamed, unquote, and she gets a smuggler to get her to Italy, and then she has to prostitute herself to pay back the smuggler.
That's what I'm being told.
Oh my
the only
God.
woman, the only woman I met in person who was fleeing Boko Haram was not actually a direct victim. Her father had been killed by Boko Haram. So these are stories I'm hearing, but from more than one journalist, from more than one NGO worker. So I do believe this is happening. Yeah.
Is there any support, or I know that they don't have the funds either, but the women's movement in the southern Italy?
What I'm hearing about are, really excellent NGO efforts to take in women, men, girls, boys. But one thing that I found disturbing is that at least for unaccompanied minors, there are houses set up for boys, and what happens is refugees are shuttled from one city to another. Once a detention center is full, they get put in another one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's happening to the girls, the underage girls, apparently they're being shipped off to nunneries. And I was unable to sort of follow that exact story. Apparently the system is not set up to deal with girls, so that's a real problem in itself. And when it comes to what the government is doing, no doubt Italy is extremely overwhelmed. But the further I've been looking into who's profiting from these refugee centers, who's profiting.
Yes, that was my next question. Exactly, my next question.
It's undoubtedly linked to the mafia in Italy. There have been some recent arrests in Rome. Clearly, this is a business at this point. Each refugee brings in a certain amount of money that comes with them from the government, and there's a tremendous amount of corruption at this point.
And in general, the south of Italy, I mean, feminists there have said again and again, it mirrors the global north and the global south. The wealth's in the north, and we here in the south are the poor cousins. Even within the country, so the local coffers are probably pretty slender. Certainly, of the women's movement, they're almost non-existent. What can be done internationally to put pressure on Italy, on the UN agencies? What do you think might address this?
The EU has been meeting to try to figure out what's next. Mm-hmm. I think what needs to happen is, I don't know if you've heard about this wall being built in Hungary, that they want to build a wall to keep out, quote, migrants, which is a whole other problem.
I heard, but say a little more about that, because I don't think many Americans have heard. This is the kind of news that, unfortunately, we're breaking on this program, because it's not getting out. You're right, it's not getting out. So
there's an incredible right-wing, xenophobic movement building in a number of countries, including Italy, including France, and now in Hungary they want to build a wall to keep out who they're calling them migrants, which I have a real problem with, and I noticed that you're using the word refugees.
Yeah.
And I've confirmed with UNHCR that the majority are refugees. They're people fleeing war. They have no choice. They're not economic migrants.
Right.
And of course, politicians in Europe are trying to make it sound like these people are coming to take our jobs, they're coming to take our homes.
Right.
So what really needs to happen, I think, is a shift in the conception that this is a humanitarian crisis. Like after World War II, there were programs put into place, and there was sharing throughout Europe of the burden. Yeah. And at this point, that's not happening. And instead you have people erecting, metaphorical walls and possibly an actual wall instead of helping.
And of course, it's a legacy of colonialism, because if if the North goes south and mines it of all its natural resources, its diamonds, its oil, its whatever it can get, its gold. This is, in one sense, turnabout, because the South is starving and it can't make a living, and it comes north, to work in jobs that people in the North don't even want to begin with. But then suddenly the WOGs have arrived, and we have to keep them out.
Of course, and there have been studies done that if if instead Europe were to welcome these people with open arms, that they would join the workforce and, create a tremendous amount of capital for Europe.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
And there's also, there's a lot of racism coming into play. And in a very simple way, I witnessed this. Every single refugee I spoke to who'd come over on one of these terrible wooden rickety boats talked about that the sub-Saharan Africans are all held below deck, where there's very little air. Very rarely was there any food or water. The smugglers lied to them, told them there'd be food and water. And then the Middle Easterners are allowed to travel on the deck. And that in Libya, sub-Saharan Africans are referred to by smugglers as the slaves.
The slaves. Literally, the slaves.
Literally, yes.
It just makes you inarticulate with rage.
And this is the other reason I think we're not hearing their stories. There's just tremendous trauma. I didn't speak to a woman or a man who had been through Libya, which is the route that most refugees are taking. I didn't speak to a single person who had not been raped, tortured, beaten, or shot during their time in Libya. And the ensuing trauma is just so tremendous. I sat with this woman I met fleeing Boko Haram, and she could barely lift her head. She couldn't stop crying, and she'd been in Italy for a year. And I said, have you had any kind of counseling? And she didn't understand the concept of therapy. Yeah. So I said, well, has anyone approached you to speak to you to try to make you feel better? And she said, why would I do that? I'm fine. And I said, are you able to sleep at night? And she said, no, I don't sleep ever. All I think about is death. So, the level of trauma is extreme, and there's really no help being offered.
Oh, Lauren, well, bless you for going into places that nobody else wants to go and hearing stories nobody else wants to hear and coming back and sharing them with us. You do really fine work as a journalist and with Women Under Siege. I presume that you're going to be writing about this for Women Under Siege and continuing the coverage because nobody else is doing it.
Yes, I have a big story I'm working on right now, looking at women overall in the refugee crisis, and I've already got at least one slideshow up. I've taken a bunch of photo essays, so those will be appearing on Women Under Siege in the next week or two.
Wonderful. Give the website, just in case somebody has forgotten it among our listeners.
Sure. It's womenundersiegeproject.org, and again, it's part of the Women's Media Center.
Yes, you can find it by itself, womenundersiegeproject.org, or you can go to womensmediacenter.com and link to it from there. But find it and get the regular RSS feeds, because even though it won't make your day, it will make your consciousness. Thank you, Lauren, and thanks for being with us and coming back to the show.
Thank you, Robin.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor in the Clinton administration, now professor of public policy at Berkeley, has a website easily found with one Google click for Robert Reich, R-E-I-C-H, and he has recently posted his latest essay, which is quite interesting, called How to Disrupt the Military-Industrial Congressional Complex, taking off from Eisenhower's famous speech, courageous speech, about the military-industrial complex decades ago. Apparently, President Obama is considering an executive order requiring federal contractors to disclose their political spending. Reich urges him to sign it immediately and to go further and to ban all political spending by federal contractors that receive more than half their revenues from the government. It's bad enough what we've had to suffer since the Citizens United decision that lets corporations secretly funnel cash into American politics. But when big government contractors do the funneling, American taxpayers foot the bill twice over. We're paying their lobbying and campaign expenses. Yeah. And the defense contractors are the biggest federal contractors of all. A study by St. Louis University political scientist Christopher Whitko revealed a direct relationship between what a corporation spent on campaign contributions and the amount it received back in government contracts. A case in point is America's largest contractor, Lockheed Martin. More than 80% 85% of Lockheed's revenues come from the U.S. government, mostly from the Defense Department. But it's hard to say that they do deliver good products. For example, they're the main contractor for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which is the single most expensive weapons program in history and has been plagued by so many engine failures and software glitches that Lockheed and its subcontractors practically had to start over entirely this year. So why do we keep throwing good money after bad? Well, look behind the money. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, Lockheed's Political Action Committee spent over $4 million on the 2014 election cycle. They've already donated over $1 million toward candidates in 2016. The top congressional recipient of Lockheed's largesse is Mac Thornberry, Republican of Texas, chair of the House Armed Services Committee. Second highest is Rodney Frelinghuysen, Republican of New Jersey, chair of the Defense Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee. What do you know? Lockheed also spent over $14 million lobbying Congress last year with its fleet of Washington, D.C. lawyers and lobbyists. And guess what? Remarkably, 73 of Lockheed's 109 lobbyists are former Pentagon officials, congressional staffers, White House aides, and former members of Congress. Now, the 10 largest federal contractors are all defense contractors, and we are paying them basically to hire former government officials to lobby current government officials, and we're also paying them to bribe current politicians. Not acceptable and surreal. Time for another break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and in just a few seconds we'll be hearing from a fierce feminist rock critic. So stick around.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. Jessica Hopper began writing about rock and pop culture when she was a teenager and part of the Riot Girl movement. She had a fanzine, Hit It or Quit It. And then she spent a decade or so as a freelance writer for the New York Times, Chicago Reader, Spin, and LA Weekly. She's now editor-in-chief of the Pitchfork Review, and she has just published her first book, great title, The First Collection of Criticism by a Living Female Rock Critic. And here is Jessica Hopper. Jessica, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, congratulations on the book, first of all, with the best title that I may ever have read. The First Collection of Criticism by a Living Female Rock Critic is the whole title. And I would add the subtitle should be, and it's damn well about time. But yes. In fact, the only real, I was thinking about this, the only, any kind of predecessor that I could think of was Ellen Willis. In the 70s and early 80s. But Ellen, and she certainly was an early feminist, but Ellen left her feminism in one category when she did rock criticism and vice versa. So I remember a big argument we had at one point over the lyrics to Brown Sugar of the Rolling Stones, and there were black feminists saying this is a terrible racist song and he shouldn't be, and she was defending the song and saying feminism stops where rock begins, which made me a little crazy. You don't do that.
No, I was encouraged at a very early age by my mom, who was a feminist and an editor at the daily paper in Minneapolis. That feminist worldview was just part of being female. I grew up reading this is very a book that came free, I think, with my mom's Ms. subscription,
Mm-hmm.
Stories for Free Children. And, it really, a lot of stories challenging the notion of even, gender. And I was reading that when I was 4 and 5 years old. So I got started a little early. And so, it's not a hat that you take off.
That's right.
And being a feminist is very much, and having that lens and being able to articulate that and having that actually be the crux of a lot of the way that I analyze and hear music and how I experience it and how I communicate and what I see value in, and the canons that I've challenged, or the canons that I consider. Those are all entirely informed by feminism and also just my experience of being, a young woman in the world. And, there's certainly a lot of my peers who at different points are editors who early on would say, well, basically you need to drop your agenda and be a generalist. But what gave me a career was, my continual assertion of both this identity, but also that's how I looked at things, and it set me apart from some of my peers. And granted, there's much more of a realm and a role for feminist criticism within music now. It's much more accepted than it even was, I think, 10 or 15 years ago. And certainly, the people who paved that path before me, Ann Powers and Evelyn McDowell, and McDonald, who were, early Village Voice people, and most certainly Ellen Willis.
Right. It always boggles my mind, though, that somebody says you need to drop that lens and be more generalist, when actually I think of it as we're all faced with a patriarchal lens, and it's when we strip that off, that's when we see the full picture. It's like having an eye patch on one eye, and then you take, and then suddenly you have depth perception, because what do you know? You're factoring in the majority of people on the planet who happen to be female. What do you know? Big shock.
Yeah, even just going to a concert can be a very gendered experience.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing music is a very gendered experience. It never occurred to me that I could pick up a guitar and play in a band until I saw other women doing that when I was 15 and 16 years old. And, the all-female bands that I saw were the ones that really were my permission slip and were sort of, a you belong here writ large. To me. And what I was really fortunate to grow up in Minneapolis in the early 1990s, where at the Alt Weekly, the city pages, the pop critic was, the feminist critic Terry Sutton. And I thought that was very normal, that I would read someone in, city pages every week who was writing things like saying Marianne Faithfull's story, her memoir is as important as the Stones. Yes. And she deserves as much of, and I just thought, and light bulb went off, was like, yes, I can do this. I want to do this.
Tell us who you like these days and who we should be listening to that we might not be or might not know of. And tell us also about the fact that you're now editor-in-chief of the Pitchfork Review.
Well, but I was freelance for about 19 years, since I was 19 years old.
Wow.
And finally, I have young children, and I wanted a little bit more steadiness, and also I wanted to put to use all the things that I learned with, my wonderful editors, my longtime editors at the Chicago Reader, Kiki Abalon, and some of my other editors that I worked with, who just gave me the most dutiful and rigorous editing. And a lot of young writers and a lot of young female writers really don't get those opportunities. And so I was really looking to try to find a way that I could go somewhere where I could give other young writers and other women and other people just whose perspectives are underrepresented in music media an opportunity.
That's
and
great.
So that was a lot of what that was about. And
we should say Pitchfork Review is reachable listeners at Pitchfork, just like the farm implement, Pitchfork dot com, and it's terrific, and that's where you can find it, and presumably more of Jessica's writing as well as the folks.
And you know, the other thing too is that you know, we're at, I feel like, very much a golden age for both women in music criticism and women in music, because I think we're starting to get to a place where people are stopping to like looking at women so much as sort of interlopers. Like, we can understand that we're making more room for girl genius.
I love it. I love it.
And, you know, and we can see that everything from, you know, St. Vincent, you know, who's an incredible, you know, virtuoso player, but just so creative. She is the David Bowie of our times. And then I think also something that I've been returning to right now, you know, so much is Erykah Badu. And in part because I feel like, you know, some of the really wonderful conversations about, you know, radical black music right now that are going on around the recent records by Kendrick Lamar and D'Angelo, we forget that Erykah Badu made New America a few years ago, which is, you know, sometimes, you know, women of color get lost in these conversations about pop because we just think, oh, this is done, this is, you know, past, something like this. But it's like, she absolutely, you know, is a progenitor and is very much an essential part of if we're going to have that conversation about pop music right now, we have to remember the women that sometimes get written out of that conversation.
How fantastic. I mean, so you're reviving the older stuff, you're discovering the newer stuff, you have a forum through Pitchfork Review, and you're writing still yourself. Now, go back to the book and tell us about the book.
You know, the book is a collection of work that I've done primarily in the last 15 years. I started writing and being published, you know, at the ripe old age of 16, and I just kept going. You know, I was told for years that, you know, some of my male peers who had books like these were kind of the special exception, and that people don't buy feminist work, and they don't buy essay collections, and they don't buy music criticism. And my book went into its third printing the day it came out.
Wow.
You know, so it's like, I put the lie to that one. You know, I didn't want anybody who's coming up behind me to hear those excuses. Women want to see their own representation.
There's a there's a huge hunger for that. Huge.
I mean, woman who's ever been to a concert and you know, you know, or gone to even the book section at a, you know, good bookstore, and you see, you're like, wait a minute, there's only like 6 memoirs by women and maybe 2 biographies.
Yeah.
And you know, but any man who so much as made a record in the 70s has at least, you know, his own section. And
of course.
It's the sort of thing that just drives you to write, and one of the things that kept me motivated.
So people can find it on Amazon and all places the books are sold. The first collection of criticism by a living female rock critic who you heard of right here. And we will keep following you and your work both at pitchfork.com and the book and all the other writing that you do. Congratulations on the book, Jessica, and on the fact that you're giving voice to a whole area where we've been forced to whisper or mumble, and you're just living it right out loud. Bless you for that.
Thank you so much for having me. Real pleasure.
We have to take one last break here at Women's Media Center Live, and I am Robin Morgan, and we'll be right back with some fighting words. So stay with us.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back again, just in time for some fighting words. I realize that I rarely devote fighting words to an environmental issue, probably because there seem so many pressing ones about human beings. But this time, well, yes. Less than 20 years ago, an astounding 1 billion monarch butterflies migrated to Mexico every year for the winter. This past winter, just 56 million monarchs made the journey, in very large part due to the spraying of deadly herbicides produced by industrial agricultural giants like Dow Chemical. They are obliterating the native milkweed plants that monarch butterflies need to survive. They can't live without milkweed. It's the only plant on which they lay their eggs. No milkweed means no monarchs. And now Dow Chemical has unveiled something called Enlist Duo, D-U-O, which is a next-generation herbicide that will escalate the toxic assault on the milkweed. It's a 1-2 punch. It combines milkweed-destroying glyphosate with 2,4-D, an herbicide that also may pose a health risk to human beings. Dow needs to end this by shelving its plans for Enlist Duo, and we can have a voice in that. A wonderful organization, Natural Resources Defense Council, is organizing about this. And if you simply go to nrdc.org/savemonarchs, all you have to do is put your name on a petition, and they will mail your statement to the head of Dow Chemical. They will do all the work. It's not unimportant. NRDC, N as in Nancy, nrdc.org/savemonarchs. And now let me tell you something about monarchs and why I find them quite magical. One citizen of the universe is this small creature who, as a matter of normalcy, transforms itself through 4 distinct lives within 4 distinct existences. The monarch is sometimes called the milkweed butterfly, since the underside of milkweed leaves is the only food its larvae can eat. Monarchs and related species are found wherever milkweed's own plant relatives, sometimes called bloodflowers, grow, and they grow on every continent except the polar regions. The plant protects its butterfly. The so-called milk ingested by a larva renders the monarch poisonous to birds of prey. But in the intricate balance requiring fairness to predators, however, the flicker of black-banded tangerine monarch wings signals that this prey might be toxic. Then again, a sly counter to simplistic assumptions. Not all monarchs are poisonous, since not all milkweeds produce noxious juices. Yet the butterfly's warning still performs a witty camouflage for poisonous and non-poisonous monarchs alike, arming both against birds of prey. And because life imitates not only art, but itself, the innocently non-toxic viceroy butterfly mimics the colors and patterns of the monarch, sending the same alert, gaining the same protection. The wings of both butterflies, of all butterflies in fact, collect energy from sunlight so as to stay warm. They literally reap the light. The monarch, apparently unsatiated by these gaudy carnival masks of color, reinvents itself ceaselessly, shifting through 4 discrete lives in a single existence, and paying the price exacted by such metamorphoses with repeated death throes and relentless resurrections. The minuscule eggs laid on the underside of milkweed leaves take 3 to 5 days to hatch into tiny larvae, who begin sucking at the leaves. Over the next 2 weeks, each larva elongates into a black-striped worm the color of green young limes, capable of spinning threads from itself. It weaves these into a sheath, then it wreathes its body inside the chrysalis, the cocoon where it dangles for another lifetime, 10 days. Finally, with the violence characteristic of any organism writhing free from old forms, what had been a caterpillar emerges, wet, matted, unrecognizable, until wings shudder open and spread, harvesting light, drying into perfect miniature stained-glass windows the hues of sunrise and midnight, an adult monarch. Then it steps out onto air and flies. Whether it remembers or cares who it was before flight is a matter of speculation, but only among humans. This last lifetime aloft can be as short as 14 or as long as 40 days, during which time it might mate, might lay eggs, then it dies. Well, not quite. These quatrefoil lives on a single stem parallel 4 existences in one discrete life, 4 generations in a single year, which the monarch butterfly requires for survival. The first generation, born in late winter, perishes after having laid eggs for the next. The second generation, born in late spring, does the same. So does the third, born in midsummer. All 3 develop, creep, suck, grow, spin, weave, wrap, dangle, writhe, shudder, spread, fly, mate, spawn, and die. All 3 follow the same quartile cycle: larva, caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly. But the 4th generation is different. The 4th generation, born in autumn, does not die after 14 days or even 40. The 4th generation migrates. It flies for 3 months, over oceans, through storms, lightning, snows, predators, beating wings filmy as petals, almost 3,000 miles. No other insect can fly such a distance. Once the monarchs recognize as home the roosting place where they have in fact never been, they land. The 4th generation rests in this warmth for as long as 8 months, hibernating in clusters, each monarch slowing its heart rate until internal time turns on the annual axis of light. Then up to 2/3 of this generation emerges, twice born, to mate, lay eggs, and then die. From those eggs, life stage 1 of the 1st generation begins again. The last third of the old generation, re-emerging, twice born, it starts the journey back. Great glowing blizzards of wings swarming and mating in the hundreds of thousands, resting along the way in stages, spawning, dying. A new generation then takes to the air for as long as 3 months, across oceans, through heat, rain, winds, predators, beating and beating wings, filmy as petals, almost 3,000 miles. Once the monarchs recognize as home the place where they have never been, they land. There it begins again. There are theories about why the monarch migrates, but no one knows for sure. There are studies of the migratory patterns, but the routes change. The migration takes up to 3 generations to complete. Only one thing is known for certain. No one butterfly ever makes the round trip. nrdc.org/Save Monarchs. And that's it for this week. The last straw today is Bill Cosby, who, it turns out, decades ago admitted in a deposition, a legal deposition, that he had bought Quaaludes to give to a woman to have sex with her, even though more recently, of course, he accused women who said that exact thing had happened to them with him of being liars and accused the press of running with stories by liars. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com for the show, plus the archive of all the previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live, WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, Senior Producer, Crystal Williams Chancellor, and our founding sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and do not forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.